Hello, everyone.
Hey there, folks.
This is Amanda.
And this is Rita.
And you're listening to
I Don't Know Her,
the podcast where we talk about women and some other folks that you've never heard of.
And you probably should have.
Yes, for sure. Actually, today, the person I'm talking about, you've probably heard of, but you do not know the whole story.
I love it already.
Yeah, I do too. I will tell you that I have put days of research into this. It's a little long, so buckle up, everybody.
Alrighty, go grab your snack.
Yeah. Do this one on 1.25 speed. So you can listen to it in an hour.
There you go.
So talk to me about there was like an intriguing thing that Rita said. She was like, my therapist asked me a question that I've been mulling over for a week, and I cannot seem to answer it. Now I'm very intrigued. I'm very curious, so I want to know what it is.
So she's working on me with my many disorders that I've had that have not been treated. So we're going through, I'm trying to find kind of the root, and we know kind of some of the root of it. But also like, as I've developed, and these are in quotations, my coping mechanisms, which are extremely unhealthy, we're trying to figure out how to put new tools in the toolbox to cope. And so we were going through some questions that she was asking me, and then she asked me, if you like take a look deep down inside, she goes, why do you feel like you can't cope without these things, whether or not it was the eating disorder or the self-harm or, over drinking, over drugging. She says, what is it that makes you feel in that moment that you can't cope? Like when stress happens and you need to reach for something. And I was like, and I went off on a tangent on something else. And she was like, you didn't answer me. And I was like, what was the question again? Like I asked her again. She says, why can't you cope? And I can't answer that.
Why do you think you can't answer it?
I feel like I don't want to. Because
that's
then
some honesty.
Because if I feel like if I start coping, like I'm scared. I'm scared to be in reality without being in the fog, without being, reaching for something and just taking care of it. Because it's always worked for me. Mm-hmm. I would, if I was... To a degree, when I was a kid, I think I started cutting when I was 10 or 11. And I did that till I was 21 years old. And I did have a relapse like 2 years ago, but that was quickly addressed and snuffed out. I used to burn myself. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not good.
And it would take care of the feelings, at the moment. I just didn't want to feel, what I was feeling.
Right.
And I still remember the first time I actually used that coping mechanism was after an argument with my mother.
Oh, okay. So maybe we are getting at the root of some things.
Yeah. It was pure, it was frustration. It was rage. It was anger. And I remember going up into my room and doing that. And I just thought, wow, this feels so much better. And you know what? Fuck everybody else.
Yeah. And also probably being misunderstood.
Definitely.
And we've talked at length on the show and in other conversations about that expectation of mothers and the way that for me, the way that their words can cut deeper than anyone else on the planet.
Yeah.
They just have a way to say the thing that will hurt the most. Mm-hmm. So I feel like you just answered the question.
What was the answer that you heard?
You said because that is the only way that you could get through it, because then you didn't have to acknowledge it.
Yeah. And I don't, which is crazy because I can be extremely straightforward and honest, but then I can also be I feel like a cat, when they run backwards, when it's facing my own emotions. And so her asking me, why can't you cope? I was like, I don't know how.
So I wonder if the real question is, why do you avoid coping?
That's a good way to put it.
So
do you feel you are good at coping?
Fuck no. No, absolutely not. I mean, I think I have been with certain things, and I've gotten better with age. Conversations don't scare me as much, but I briefly mentioned that I'm having like a work interpersonal problem with a person at work. There's a specific person I'm having an issue with who is unfortunately got some power that I don't have and can wield that power over me. And instead of going to this person and being like, hey, we need to sit down and hammer this shit out because what you're doing is unacceptable. Instead, I go to every other person who might be able to handle that before, like for me.
Yeah.
So instead of me going directly to her, which I know is probably the thing that would actually help the most, is directly confronting her. And at least if I directly confront her, she won't be able to wiggle out of it. Right. But I can't. I can't. The idea of that makes me want to break out in hives. Like it makes my chest start to like go red and itchy. I can't do it. And like I'm a person that you would think would be able to confront someone when they're doing something shitty.
Yeah.
It's just in this particular situation, I think it does go back to the mother wound. It's an older woman, a motherly figure in the school. Like that's kind of her role. She does a lot of motherly things, and she's mothered me in the past and decided this year that she despises me. Out of nowhere, I have no idea what happened.
Yeah.
My only indication is it probably has something to do with me getting COVID. Because that's been a pain in her ass for everybody. So anyway, I think that's probably the root cause. And that makes me mad and sad. But I am not willing to actually like go to her and confront her. I cannot solve this problem for myself because I refuse to actually just like fucking pull up my britches and do it.
Yeah. I feel like that about a lot of things when it comes to my emotions. Like I just don't want to, like you said, deal with it and buck up and show up kind of thing.
I think that's not an uncommon problem. You know, I think there are a lot of folks who do exactly that. They know what they probably should be doing, but cannot find the strength to do it. Whether it's because of anxiety or just like that terror you might feel at like how the other person will respond.
Oh yeah, the fear.
That's what that's what often catches up my wife is like the anticipated response of the other person. Like she's afraid that they'll get mad. And I'm like, I always ask her, and then what happens if they get mad? Like if it's me, what happens if I get mad? What's going to happen? She was like, well, you'll be mad at me. And I was like, okay, and then what?
And then
she's like, and then we'll talk about it. And then it gets fixed.
Yes.
And so like logically I can help someone else through that thought process. But for myself, I catastrophize.
I feel like, because I've always had a problem with compulsion. We're kind of putting, you know, the hammer on the head of the nail there. I can't just, because I told her like, I can't just have like, if I'm in a full like binge mode, I can't just eat like a couple of chips. I'll eat the whole bag and then I'll eat the second bag. Then I'll eat this over here and I'll drink that over there. And then I'll eat a whole pint of ice cream and then I'll throw it all up. And so it starts like a little snowball and it just goes down the hill. Or like with cigarettes, I was like, okay, I'm just going to do 1 or 2 a day. Freaking pack and a half a day. It rolls too. Yeah. And it's just like, I couldn't just deal without having to put something inside me to help me cope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It also seems like it's an occupation thing. If you're doing something with your hands, your mouth, whatever, then you don't have to stop and think and confront what you're trying to avoid. Yeah. Because you're occupied. You're doing the thing. You're smoking a cigarette. You're drinking a drink. You're eating a thing. And you don't have to like just sit with your thoughts.
That's scary.
I know.
But we're working on it. And I'm really enjoying the process of... She's really good. I mean, therapy has been great. If anybody out there is contemplating it, I highly recommend it. It is really good to sit with somebody who has nothing to lose or nothing to win. They're just there to help.
Yeah. I always say that it's always good to talk to somebody who has no stake in your happiness. You know, they're not a loved one, a partner, a friend who just desperately wants you to be okay. Like your therapist wants you to be okay, but not in the same way.
Yeah.
Like, loved ones will often want you to be okay at the expense of yourself, actually. Because what they want is they want it to be easy.
Yeah.
And that can often mean overlooking or shoving stuff under the carpet that you need to confront.
Yeah, just so it's nice and neat and put in a box and taken care of.
If it's out of sight, out of mind, right?
Yeah.
So that's why a therapist is great. The therapist is not interested in having it be out of sight, out of mind.
No.
But instead bringing it into the light and confronting it and taking its power away from you.
Yeah. I do like that she's kind of squirrely too. Because like the other day she like tried to cross her leg and knocked over her like entire computer and papers and stuff. And
I need that therapist.
She also made a cup of coffee and put cream in it and she couldn't find a spoon. So she used her pen.
See, that is the realness I need too. Yeah. I have a therapist as well and she's very kind. I'm not sure she's the best fit for me. But the process of trying to get a therapist in the first place is so arduous that I'm like, whatever, this'll do. And maybe when I'm in a different place, I'll feel differently. Again, I think she's kind. She's got a lot of tools. I don't know that we're the right fit. It's like when you date somebody who's got all of the things you're like, this is right?
You're good on paper.
And you're like, you just keep looking at your friends like, this is working, right?
You need that. Anybody else seeing
and all
this?
your friends are like, sure? Question mark? I don't know. Yeah, that's how I feel about this. Like,
yeah.
It's okay.
I did have one therapist before the one that I have now, and she was good, but she was a little too like, she let me get away with stuff. And she was very just like overly sympathetic and just, she was allowing me the space to not put the mirror up in my face. My therapist now is like, here you go.
Let's take a look. Yeah, I had a therapist who helped me come out the first time who was incredible. And I'd had 2 different people before that who were terrible. And so I was young enough that like that was really the first true experience with a good counselor I'd ever had. And it was life-changing. It fundamentally changed the trajectory of who I was, who I would become, how I would be able to survive, how I was in my marriage. Like all of that is due to the work that I did with her. And it's like when you have like the perfect meal and you just keep trying to make that meal again and you can never get it quite like it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just settle for something relatively close at this point, but like it's a hard thing to find. It's like, it is like dating, It
is. It's extremely intimate.
And if you're a settler, like you'll be like, this person is nice. Mm-hmm. And you just settle for that person, then you miss out on the opportunity to find somebody who actually fits well.
Yeah.
And that's sort of where I'm at, is that I'm like, I'm not sure this fits me, but it's doing the job right now that I need. So
yeah. Well, hopefully my journey
she does not listen to this.
My journey to cope will end up me actually using the tools.
You will, because I'll hold you to it.
Oh, great.
Now you'll have 2 of us. So I mentioned last week about that I was going to have a doctor's appointment, and I was very nervous. Mm-hmm. I have not, and up until that moment, told a single medical professional, because like about my gender, partially because, as I think I've talked about on the show before, once you tell people, then they're responsible for their behavior. Mm-hmm. And so if they continue to like misgender or, use wrong pronouns and never correct themselves, then it like changes my perspective of them. Like I have to then understand and know that they're not who I want them to be. Mm-hmm. But if they don't know, then they can't fuck up.
Yeah.
So, and it's just like going to the doctor in the first place is a lot for me. It's pretty traumatic at this point because of all the shit I've had to go through in the last few years. Mm-hmm. So I just don't like doing it. And I don't want to tell them. So I was really, really, really nervous, as I talked about on the show, but it got progressively worse. Like I was like My stomach was churning.
Oh no.
I was like shallow breathing.
Yikes.
And it really was quite funny. So I'm sitting with my OB. I haven't seen her in a while because last time I went in, I had actually seen like an assistant, not her. So I haven't seen her since basically after I had my surgery that she did a few years ago.
That's been a couple of years, yeah.
Yeah. So she was like, tell me everything. I want to know what's going on in your life. And she's like, and then she's like asking me the like standard questions on the form that is like, have you had any smelly vaginal discharge? And then she's like, have you had any nipple discharge? And I was like, no, but I don't want them.
That's how you said it?
Yeah. She was like, wait, what? And she was like, do you have lumps or what are you? And I was like, no, I don't want my boobs. I don't want my breasts. I don't want them. She just goes,
Okay.
Yeah. Do you want a referral for a surgeon?
Oh.
I think I literally inhaled and went, yes. And she goes, okay, we can do that. And I said, yeah, I've been on a gender journey. She goes, okay. Are you interested in bottom surgery? I can do bottom surgery if you're interested in it. And I was like, oh,
wow.
What? Like, it was incredible. It was easy. It was supportive. Like, then she went to like, listen to my heart and she goes, oh, wait, what are your pronouns now? And I said, they, them.
I love it.
And then she turns to the assistant and says, put that on the chart right now. We'll make sure that is on there and people are respectful when you come in next time.
Wow. That's great.
It was.
Yeah.
And so I have a referral for a surgeon and I'm very excited, but also nervous. Like, I don't know if the surgeon is going to be like her and it's just going to be like easy or if I'm going to. So I had like planned an entire speech.
It's all written on your hand. You're like, damn it.
Like all of this like list of justifications as to why I should be allowed to have the surgery, right? And then like I didn't have to use all of any of them. And so now I'm like, I got to keep those handy for this surgeon. Mm-hmm. I'm just worried that it's going to be somebody who's like, you don't look like you're non-binary, So I'm hopeful, like I'm cautiously optimistic about the situation after this first experience. That was very hopeful. Like, I don't think that based on her reaction and her respectfulness towards me, I feel like she would not refer me to a person who wasn't going to be those things.
Yeah.
But then, she's not in control of someone else's shitty behavior either.
True, but it sounds like this isn't the first time. Yeah. And like there's proper channels that she's going to know what to refer you to.
And she also, I said, like, do you know what I need to do in order to get, like, approved? And she was like, well, I do bottom surgery, so I really only know what those requirements are. Mm-hmm. But she's like, I'm pretty sure you're going to have to see 2 or 3 mental health professionals to get them to okay it.
What?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, my gosh. So, like, to see if you're not mentally ill or something like that?
Yeah,
is that what that is? Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have to see at least 2 or 3 mental health professionals that will like sign off and say they're allowed to have the surgery. Mm-hmm. They're a well-adjusted person, I promise. But what if I wasn't? Like, who cares?
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Anyway. That is the next hoop I will jump through.
Alrighty.
And I'm sure I'll keep you all apprised of it.
Okay, first step.
First step done.
Okay.
Are we ready for today?
Yes, absolutely.
I'm real stoked on this one. Also infuriated by it.
Oh, no.
It's one of those.
Okay.
Do you know who Claudette Colvin is?
The name does not sound familiar, no.
She was a teen girl who sparked the Montgomery bus boycotts and ultimately was the key witness in a landmark case to end segregation on all public transportation in Alabama.
Ooh.
Not Rosa Parks.
Yeah.
So we're going to get to that.
Okay. Okay, when you said that, something hit. Okay.
Yeah. Claudette Colvin was born... So I'm just going to put this out here right now. I read a fantastic book by a man named Philip Hoos, and it's called Claudette Colvin, Twice Toward Justice. Came out in 2009. Excellently written, incredibly well researched. He did multiple interviews with her, all of them more than an hour long each, and in interviews with a ton of other people. I would highly recommend reading the book. It's a pretty fast read. It's a young adult nonfiction.
Nice.
And it's the only one really about her. And so it's just really, really good. And he also interviewed other people who were involved in the movement at the time. So it's got a lot of context in it.
Oh, so he was there.
Well, not at the time, no. But he went back and interviewed all of these people.
Oh, okay. I got it.
So that's where the majority of my stuff is going to come from. And so I highly recommend you read the whole book. Claudette Colvin was born on September 5th, 1939 in Birmingham, Alabama. She was actually named after Claudette Colbert. Do you remember that name?
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, she was a famous Hollywood actress who was dressed by Irene Lentz.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I was like, we've got a connection here. Claudette actually had an interesting upbringing. She had biological parents. Her bio mom was named Mary Jane Gadsden, and her bio dad was named C.P. Austin. Her bio father was in and out of the picture and fathered two of the children that her mother had, but he didn't stick around, and eventually she told him not to come back, the mother. Her bio mother really struggled to raise the children. I'm not entirely sure what the situation was. She did have children by multiple fathers. Mm-hmm. And eventually Claudette moved in with her great aunt and uncle when she was a baby. So
oh, wow.
She was not around with her bio mom for long. And she called her great aunt mom and her great uncle dad.
Okay.
So pretty much for the rest of the story, when I say mom and dad, that's who I'm talking about.
Okay.
I will specifically say bio mom if I talk about her biological mother. So they were her parents that ended up raising her. They lived in a really tiny little country town outside of Montgomery, Alabama called Pine Level. It was a sharecropper community. So people who post-slavery were given little plots of land to farm. So they were in a sharecropper community, and Mary Ann was her name, which is also her mother's name. Her bio mom's name is Mary as well, but that's Mary Jane, and this is Mary Ann.
Okay. Whoa. So
Mary Ann and Q.P. Colvin are the ones who raised Claudette. And she called them mom and dad, but they were actually closer to a grandparent's age, right? Because they're her great aunt and uncle.
Yeah.
Mary Ann and Q.P. had a daughter of their own, a girl named Velma, but Velma was an adult by the time they took in Claudette. So she wasn't around. So for a while, Claudette was like the only child in the house. Mm-hmm. And eventually, though, one of Claudette's sisters, Delphine, moved in with them. And that was great because now Claudette had a sister and she could play. And they were just like, it was kind of like an idyllic little life growing up in this sharecropper community. Yeah. It reminded me a lot of what Edna Lewis talked about.
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
She was a real big tomboy, loved climbing trees, catching insects. She reminded me of a little young Rita.
That's definitely my jam.
She went to a one-room schoolhouse because that's what the community had, and it had all 6 grade levels inside this one-room schoolhouse and one teacher.
Wow, that's going old school.
I know.
Yeah, where one teacher and everybody's all in the room.
And I was like, God, that sounds not great as a teacher.
No.
6, you have to know the subject matter for every subject and all grade levels. Holy shit.
And have a mixed room of kids that can sit still and kids that can't. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And she talked about how school wasn't necessarily priority number 1 in the community, and attendance wasn't always great. So a farmer would just pop his head into the room and be like, I need a couple boys to help me with harvest. And then these just boys would jump up and leave. And as a teacher, I was like, no. I would be so mad. You could never get anywhere.
Yeah.
But that was like her elementary experience up until when she's 8. At 8 years old, her mom, Mary Ann, inherits a house in the town of Montgomery.
Inherits a house?
Yeah.
Wow.
So some kind of relative died. So they move into the city. And they live in a really small hilltop neighborhood called King Hill. King Hill was not a great neighborhood in terms of like the way it was perceived. It was a poor neighborhood. They still had outhouses, like public outhouses. So the houses themselves didn't have bathrooms. You had to go to an outhouse, a shared one, which is real nasty, right? They had like clubs, and there were, fist fights and drunken behavior and things like that. It was just like a neighborhood where, there was a lot of financial depression, like economic depression. And, we have racism. It's an all black neighborhood. So that's the neighborhood that she moves into. This is important because that's going to come into play later.
Okay.
Claudette's mom worked as a maid, or I think she was called a day lady. That was like the name for it. And her father was a yard boy. Those were the names.
Terms.
But basically she worked as a maid, and he did odd jobs for white folks. Like you needed your leaves raked, he would come and do that.
Yeah.
So they didn't have like steady employment or like quote unquote respectable employment. This was like quote unquote low class.
Just getting by.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like perceived even in the black community, there was like a real big hierarchy thing happening where like if you were middle class, you worked a respectable job. These people worked not so respectable jobs. That's what was considered like the social stratosphere at the time. So Claudette knew about segregation prior to moving to Montgomery because like she's not dumb.
Yeah.
But she hadn't actually really experienced it in a significant way because she just lived in this little tiny sharecropper community. But now that she's living in Montgomery, she's seeing a lot of segregation firsthand, and it's really shitty. So she talks about a little bit of it. Like, for instance, if she went into a shop to buy a skirt, right? They couldn't try on clothes.
Oh.
The salesperson would come over and measure her.
Okay.
And then hold up a skirt to her and be like, this fits. Perfect. And that was how they could shop.
And then you probably bought it and you probably couldn't return it if it didn't fit.
Exactly.
Oh, that's shitty.
And shoes were worse, though. Guess how they had to get shoes?
How? Like,
so like normally you'd walk into a store and it's like, yeah, every shoe is like a size, but like, does it actually fit right? Who knows?
Yeah.
You have to try them on. But they were not allowed to try on shoes. So instead, their moms would trace their feet on a paper bag and then bring the brown paper bag in, and they would put a shoe on it and be like, this is the one that fits. And that's how they got shoes.
Okay.
Just the dumbest shit.
That's really stupid.
Like, you have to go out of your way to be that racist. Like,
yeah.
That is not casual racism. That is like, I am going to do everything in my power to just like make up random shit.
To make you feel less than. Yeah.
Yes.
And to make it even more steps that you have to take.
Yes.
Yeah. And hoops to jump through.
And like, I wouldn't want to put in that much work towards racism. That seems really a lot of work.
Racism is exhausting.
So, of course, her schools were segregated. There were 2 high schools in the whole city that kids could go to that were black. And so she went to one called Booker T. Washington High School. And that was the summer. So she's going to enter into high school at age 13, which I found really impressive.
Really?
I was 14 and I was pretty young. So she's 13 when she's going to head into her freshman year at Booker T. Washington. It's the summer of 1952. And right before she's going to enter her freshman year, her sister Delphine comes down with a fever. And they try everything they can to break this fever, and nothing is working. And finally, her mom takes Delphine to the hospital, to St. Jude, which was the only hospital that refused to segregate.
Oh.
It was a white man who ran the whole shebang, and he refused to put up like signs above water fountains. He refused to have separate rooms. He was like,
wow,
fuck this noise. So that's where they took Delphine, which I was really happy they took her there. She was hooked up to an iron lung because she had polio.
Oh, no.
Yep. Polio was really big that summer.
Jeez. I was thinking maybe she just had, scarlet fever or something like that.
Yep. It was polio. And Delphine never returned home. That was the last time Claudette ever saw her, was like helping try to break her fever. Delphine died on Claudette's 13th birthday.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So she's obviously devastated by her sister's death. And
Yeah.
a lot of people use that, like, we'll talk about her mental health, but like that was a thing a lot of people returned to.
Yeah.
And of course, she was in tremendous amounts of grief. This was her best friend, her confidant, the person she spent all her time with, her connection to her biological mother.
How old was her sister when she passed?
I think Delphine was older, but
Okay.
I'm not sure. I don't remember because they were like 5 kids in the house.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember if Claudette was the oldest.
Sounds like they were probably close in age.
I think they were very close in age. So Claudette learned very quickly that when she went to high school, that things were different. In high school, there was very much prescriptive ideas on what Black girls should look like and sound like and dress like and their backgrounds.
And were these ideas from her own community or
Yes.
from white people?
No, these were, well, I mean, here's what I'll say. This idea of like the right kind of hair, the good hair, was to have it straightened and to look like white girls' hair. So is that coming from inside the community? Sure. But where is that really coming from?
Yeah.
It's coming from white beauty standards that are being placed upon a Black community.
Yeah.
But that was nonetheless what was preferred. Popular girls had straight hair that was styled like a white girl's hair, and they were light-skinned, and they came from middle-class backgrounds. And that was it. If you weren't those things, you were not going to be popular. And Claudette's hair was not the kind of hair that could be flattened and laced straight and flat. It just didn't like it. She had dark skin. Like, she was one of the darkest skinned girls in her school. So that automatically put her another step behind. And she came from this very poor neighborhood. Her parents were, you know, day ladies and quote unquote yard boys. So she just was never going to be like the top of the class. And that really weighed on her. She talks in the book I read a lot about how she would be like, why isn't my natural hair good hair? Like, why do we do this to ourselves?
Yeah. It's so isolating too.
It is. And I think it's really hard when you're facing both that shittiness inside your community and outside of your community. You know, you're being told from all sides that you're not good enough.
Oh yeah. When I was like in 7th grade, because I went to school with, the population of my middle school was probably 90% Mexican. And there was like this one year where all the girls were like, let's dye our hair blonde because they wanted to be blonde. And so they were all trying to dye their hair and all their hair turned orange.
Yep.
It was so nasty. And like they had streaks of blonde in there, but not really. And I didn't do it because my mom refused to buy me anything. I didn't have any money.
Yeah.
So, but we straightened our hair and, trying to lighten it. And, if you put hydrogen peroxide, if you wash your face with that, you'll lighten up. And oh yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah. Cause I'm pretty dark in the summertime. And, my mom would say, you're getting too much sun.
Yep. You're getting too dark.
That means, yep.
So she did not enjoy this particular hierarchy situation in school. It's not good for your self-image. It's not good for your mental health.
No, it's not good for your soul.
Yeah, it's just not good. We need to stop with these stupid beauty standards. All of them. They're all dumb. So shortly into her freshman year of high school, something happens that forever changes Claudette's view on the world. Claudette's neighbor and schoolmate, a 16-year-old boy named Jeremiah Reeves, was found having sex with a white woman.
Oh.
The woman alleged that Jeremiah raped her, of course.
There's that good old go-to story.
He insisted that it was consensual. Reeves was taken into custody by the police and eventually confessed to the crime. He later recanted and said that he was coerced into confessing that the police officers were beating him and torturing him.
I believe that.
Yeah, I believe that too. Mm-hmm. Jeremiah was, despite all of this, convicted and sentenced to death. He's 16, though, and the legal age to execute somebody in the state of Alabama was 21.
Okay.
So he would be kept in prison from 16 to 21. So students at the high school, at Booker T. Washington High School that Claudette went to, were enraged by this. They knew it was unjust. And they knew that if it had been a black woman who had been supposedly raped, right? Allegedly raped by a white man, that nothing would happen.
No, not
he
at all.
wouldn't be held accountable. And yet here's this young boy who is being, put to death for something that he probably didn't do. And so Claudette was this was foundational to her. Seeing this, she knew this boy. It really, really rocked her world. Mm-hmm. And this is when she was like, this is unjust. I need to do something. This is what she said about this at the time. Jeremiah Reeves's arrest was the turning point of my life. That was when I and a lot of other students really started thinking about prejudice and racism. I was furious when I found out what had happened. Jeremiah lived right below us on the hill. I knew him well and admired him like everybody else did. The hypocrisy of it made me so angry. Black girls were extremely vulnerable. My mother and my grandmother told me never go anywhere with a white man no matter what. I grew up hearing horror story after horror story about black girls who were raped by white men and how they never got justice. Now they were going to hold Jeremiah for years as a minor just so they could legally execute him when he came of age. That changed me. That put a lot of anger in me. Her two favorite teachers at school were a woman named Miss Geraldine Nesbitt, who taught English, and Miss Josie Lawrence, who taught history. Both of them were fierce advocates for civil rights, and they were teaching their students about American history, and their version of American history included Black Americans.
Awesome.
Unlike the rest of us learning history. And this also is sparking rage in students to see this terrible injustice and really understand it. Miss Lawrence was also a very dark-skinned woman, and she was very proud of it. She would talk about being true African.
Ooh.
And Claudette was like, oh, I'm beautiful too. Miss Lawrence says she's beautiful. I'm beautiful just like Miss Lawrence.
Oh, what a powerful influence.
Yes. Case in point why students of color need to see themselves represented in their teachers. Mm-hmm. This is important. So when these two women decided to team teach Black History Week, which sounds amazing and I would love to see this, Claudette was obviously more than excited. In 1955, this is her junior year, Claudette is enraptured every day as they're discussing the injustices that Black people had suffered. And when I talked about Miss Lawrence teaching Black history, she didn't just teach Black American history. She also taught all of the African countries and their who's in power and what is the history of that nation. Things I've never fucking learned. So she is also learning now, this is how Black people ended up here. This is what we've been dealing with for the last 100 years. So she's angry.
Yeah.
And as anybody would be, she's being radicalized in the way that I feel like I've been radicalized in a similar way. Once you kind of get your eyes open, you're like, holy shit.
Yeah.
This is really fucked up and I want to do something about it.
Yeah.
And she's looking around and she's looking at the adults in her life and they're always talking about how shitty this is and how shitty that is, but they're not fucking doing anything.
Yeah.
And you know how teenagers are.
Yeah.
They're
they're so pumped.
They're ready to do this shit.
Yeah.
So she's ready to do this shit. But she doesn't really know how. And then a chance comes on March 2nd, 1955. Claudette and some of her classmates have gotten out early because it's a teacher-faculty day. Mm-hmm. And they board the city bus, they pay their fares, and they choose their seats about halfway back. So I'm going to hit the pause button for a second and talk about what riding the bus was like at this time for a Black person. Here's what the laws were. Obviously, the buses were segregated. Mm-hmm. They had a really weird setup, though. The front of the bus was for white people. The back of the bus was for Black people. And then the middle was crapshoot?
Fight over it?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
So the actual law was that no one had to move from a seat on the bus if there were no other empty seats. So if I walked on the bus and there was a white person sitting in a seat and I wanted that seat, I couldn't tell them to move. Mm-hmm. if there were no other seats. But if there were another seat and I was like, let's say I was a pregnant woman and I wanted to have a seat and there was a man sitting there, I could say, sir, can you take that seat over there so I can have this seat? Mm-hmm. Okay. But it was not legal to just
say, get up and I'm going to sit here.
But it was customary that if whites were to insist a black passenger move, they had to move from the middle, regardless of if there was an open seat or not. That meant that a lot of black riders would often have to stand if a white person wanted their seat, even if there were open seats for whites in the front.
Oh, that's so shitty.
Yes. It is just literally
And you know that people did that. They did that just to fuck with them.
Yes. Yeah. It's just about power.
Yeah.
It's about wielding the power you have and making people do things because you can.
Yeah.
The law also stipulated, this is the thing that really just irked the shit out of me, and I don't know why I've fixated on this, but it really made me mad. The law said that black riders had to get on the front of the bus to pay their fare and then get off of the bus and then go into the back entrance to get to the back.
My God.
If there were white passengers on the bus. If there were no white passengers, they could just pay and then walk to the back.
Physically pass them.
But they weren't allowed to physically walk by white passengers on the front of the bus. Even if they were headed to the back. They could not walk by them.
Jeez.
And infuriatingly, obviously, that meant that some people paid their fare, got off the front, and went to the back, and the bus driver just fucking drove away.
Yeah.
Not letting them onto the back. Whew. Just heats me. Mm-hmm. It's just arbitrary. I mean, all of this is arbitrary, obviously, but like that specific thing where you can't even let somebody walk by you.
Yeah. And it's the law.
Yes, it's the fucking law. Oh, it just irritates the shit out of me. So we're back to Claudette on the bus. She and her friends, when they first got on the bus, there were no white folks on, so they were allowed to walk on the front and just walk to the back and not have to get up back off.
Okay.
So they chose an aisle in the middle of the bus, and so two of her friends are sitting on the seats across the aisle from her, and then she's on the window seat, and there's a girl sitting next to her. Mm-hmm. So they basically, the whole row is these black classmates. As the bus moved along, the seats start filling up because it's like quitting time. Yeah. So all of these white folks are coming on the bus from each of the stops, and they're filling up the front. The front gets completely filled, and that means that any black passengers that are on the middle, and if a white person says, I want that seat, you have to move, right? However, that's not the law. That's just the customary, the way things have been done. So a white woman walks up to Claudette, to the aisle that her and her friends are occupying, and just stands there and stares at them.
Okay.
So Claudette just doesn't fucking say anything. And here's another side note. If a white person wanted to sit in a seat in that row, everyone had to move.
Oh, okay. So they would all have to stand.
Every one of them would have to move. All four of them. Yeah, all four of them. So the white woman finally is like, hello, I need you to move. Yeah, she sounded like that in 1955. It was weird.
So weird.
So the two girls who were sitting across from Claudette get up, and the girl sitting next to her gets up. Mm-hmm. And Claudette's like, I'm
not doing it.
I'm not moving.
Fuck you.
So the bus driver is like, I need those seats. Get out. She didn't move. So I'm going to play a brief clip of her talking in 2016 about what she felt that day, because I think it's important to hear from her this particular thing.
All right.
That day when the bus driver asked me to get up, I had this feeling come over me. It felt like Harriet Tubman was holding me down. Hands were holding me down on one shoulder, and Sojourner Truth hands were holding me down on another shoulder. And I was glued to the seat, and I could hear the white passengers saying, she gotta move, that's the law, she gotta move. And I felt like this is my time to take a stand for justice.
I'm going to continue on quoting her. So this is her words, but these are not in a video audio form that we can put on here. But just know that these are her actual words.
Okay.
Rebellion was on my mind that day. We had been studying the Constitution. I knew I had rights. I had paid my fare, same as white passengers. I knew the rule that you didn't have to get up for a white person if there were no empty seats left on the bus, and there weren't. But it wasn't about that. I was thinking, why should I have to get up just because a driver tells me to, or just because I'm black? Right then, I decided I wasn't going to take it anymore. I hadn't planned it out, but my decision was built on a lifetime of nasty experiences.
Nice. Don't always have to have a plan. But,
Nope.
man, that's risky. She's taken a big, big jump.
She is. So, incidentally, this is not the first person who has refused to get up. So other folks before her had refused and gotten arrested, and then they pled guilty, paid their fine, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like a little misdemeanor fine, basically. So the thing that makes her different is what's going to happen next.
Okay.
So the driver yells for her to get up. Other riders are yelling at her to get up. And a black rider from the back goes, "She ain't got to do nothing but stay black and die."
Oh my God.
And I was like, yeah, good for you. Claudette is still continuing to refuse, so the driver continues on to Court Square, which was like this huge transfer station. All of these people, tons of buses. And so there is a uniformed officer who gets on the bus and other passengers are getting on the bus at the same time. And they're not they don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
So one of them is a pregnant black woman who sits down next to Claudette, just like
She's just trying to get home.
she just wants to get on a fucking bus. And she doesn't realize what's going on. And so the officer tells them both to move. And this pregnant woman is like, "Are you kidding me? I'm not fucking moving." And so now there's two of them that won't move.
Yeah.
So the officer turns to the back of the bus where there are a whole bunch of able-bodied black men. And he goes, "If any of you are not gentlemen enough to give this lady a seat, you should be put in jail yourselves." So they take that as a threat. And so a whole bunch of guys just jump up and offer their seats to both Claudette and the pregnant woman.
Yeah.
Miss Hamilton. But the pregnant woman gets up and leaves and moves and sits on her seat because all she wants is to fucking sit down and go home.
Yeah.
Claudette is like, "No, I'm not moving."
She's like, "I started this. I'm in it."
She's continuing to refuse, but this officer is not a police officer. He is a transit officer, so he does not actually have the authority to arrest her.
Oh, yeah.
So the bus continues on to the next stop where there are two police cars waiting for them. And they are real officers, and they get on the bus and they're like, "Girl, you gotta get out of the seat. You gotta move." And she continues to refuse. She's not moving. She starts crying because it's like everybody starts yelling at her. The white passengers are saying some really nasty shit. Some of the black passengers are like, "Girl, you just got to get out of that seat."
Yeah.
And other black passengers are like, "You hold on to yourself. Like, you do this, girl."
Well, you always have that side of the ones that are fearful because they're fearful for her that something bad is going to happen.
Yeah, I don't blame any of the black people's reactions in that moment.
Oh, yeah.
They're terrified for her, terrified for themselves. This whole system is fucked. And this girl she's 15. Did I mention that? She's 15 fucking years old. She is, and also a very small girl. She's just not, it's like, this is scary. This is all terrible. So the officers stand over her and they're like, "You need to move." And she is still refusing to move. She says, "It's my constitutional right to sit here. I paid my fare. It's my constitutional right." She kept repeating that. "This is my constitutional right. It's my constitutional right." So each of the cops grab her by the hand. One of them kicks her.
Oh.
They yank her out of her seat. Her books go flying around the whole bus. And she goes limp because she knows that if you fight back, you're going to get in even more trouble. And one of the officers starts dragging her. So they both start dragging her backwards off the bus. It's a really traumatic, terrible, violent scene.
Yeah.
The entire time she's being dragged off, she's crying and she's screaming, "This is my constitutional right." She's placed in the back of the squad car and they cuff her through the windows. So this is also different. No other, as far as I could find in my research, no other person who had been arrested before, especially not a woman or a child, had been handcuffed. They may have been put in the squad car and fingerprinted and booked, but they weren't cuffed like
Physically
she was.
detained.
Then one of the officers gets in the back seat with her.
Oh, that's terrifying.
Is that not the most chilling thing?
Yeah.
I read that and I gasped and my teeth started chattering. Then they started making jokes about her bra size. and her body. They called her an N-word bitch. And she was, as we all would be, fucking terrified. She starts reciting the Lord's Prayer. She's holding her knees together. She's afraid they're going to rape her.
Oh, yeah.
She's listing off all the characters in A Midsummer Night's Dream because that's what they were studying in English. She had memorized Edgar Allan Poe's Annabelle Lee, so she starts reciting that. Anything that she can do to, like, you know, sort of like take her out of that moment.
Yeah.
And they start making fun of her, saying that she's crazy. This is all very upsetting.
Yeah.
When they arrive at the police station, the other cops call her the Thing and a whore. She was then booked and taken to an adult jail facility. She was taken straight into the cell with no phone call, so no one knew where she was.
Oh, that's so fucking illegal.
It's so scary.
Yeah.
You're at the mercy of these hideous, violent white people who want to kill you and treat you like you're garbage. She says that to this day, the sound of the key going into the lock and the cell door opening is what haunts her dreams. That was the most terrifying thing. She thought she was never going to get out.
Yeah.
Thankfully, though, the classmates who had been with her on the bus have called her mom and told her what's gone on.
Okay.
So her mother calls the Reverend H.H. Johnson. He's the Reverend of their church. And the Reverend immediately comes and gets her mom. They drive to the jail and the Reverend bails her out.
Okay.
So she is able to go home, thank God. Claudette, though, despite how terrified she was and traumatized she was really proud of herself. She did what all the adults had not done.
Yeah.
She refused.
She took a stand.
She took a stand. So word of Claudette's act and arrest spread like wildfire. And there were actually leaflets that were made. And they were like, you know, young black girl gets arrested for refusing to leave her seat. And this was like, you know, the news of the day. Everybody was talking about it.
A hot story.
Everybody's talking about it in the black community. Everybody's talking about it in the white community.
Yeah.
For much different reasons.
Yeah.
It also reached the eyes and ears of Joanne Robinson. She was a professor at Alabama State College, which is a historically black college. And she was the leader of the Women's Political Council in Montgomery, which was also a black women's political group. Mm-hmm. And just a few months prior, she'd had a really bad experience on a bus. And she's like, you know, middle class, like well-educated. So, you know, this was like eye-opening for her because I think this was generally a thing that, you know, didn't necessarily happen to middle-class black folks because most of the time they had cars. She had her own car. And so normally she drove herself everywhere, but for some reason she was taking the bus because I think she was going to the airport, so she didn't want to have her car there. So she'd had that terrible experience and had felt motivated to do something about the treatment that she had received. So she had organized a meeting of black leaders in Montgomery and some city officials and representatives from the bus company to talk about how black folks are being treated on the bus. And they laid out 3 things in this letter that they wanted. One was a new seating plan so that black riders could sit from back to front and white riders could sit from front to back. And 2, to stop making black riders pay their fares at the front and get off and then re-enter in the back. And 3, that drivers must stop at every corner in black neighborhoods like they did in the white ones. If things didn't improve, Robinson threatened a citywide boycott of the buses. But like Claudette had seen herself, they simply talked about a boycott. And they had a whole lot of polite meetings where everybody was very polite to each other, but they didn't do anything.
Nothing got done.
Nothing happened. None of those things happened. And also, those things are still working within the segregated system. They're not real positive action. Like, real positive action would be, get rid of this fucking archaic system. So, Claudette became famous overnight. Everyone knew who she was. And surprisingly, not everyone was on board. I was a little surprised by that.
Were they thinking that this was too risky?
Kinda. Some of her classmates were like, if you want something different, you need to just move away. Go to the north where things are different.
Which kind of the put up and shut up attitude.
Yeah. Like, God, why do you have to rock the boat?
Yeah. You're making it worse for all of us kind of thing.
And the reality is that Claudette's facing some serious criminal charges. And if she's convicted, she will be forever marred by this. She won't be able to get a good job. Like she's an A student, really good at school, had this idea that she wanted to become a lawyer to change the segregated laws.
Yeah.
So she has this bright future ahead of her and really wants to be able to pursue it. And if she gets convicted of this, she won't be able to do any of those things.
Yeah.
Luckily, some of the most prominent Black leaders in the city started to step in to help her, including a man named E.D. Dixon. He was like the de facto leader in Montgomery. He brought in a young lawyer named Fred Gray to represent Claudette. I think he was like 24. I mean, he was really young.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And Nixon also organized a committee of Black leaders to meet with the police. This committee included a young man named Dr. Martin Luther King.
I think I might have heard of him.
You might have heard of him. During the meeting, they agreed that everybody agreed that Claudette was treated with too much force, but they didn't drop the charges, and so she still had to go to trial. Her lawyer, Fred Gray, saw in her the opportunity to finally challenge the constitutionality of segregated transportation because she was the first person to plead not guilty.
Oh, so she's going to fight it.
Yes. So she's charged with violating the segregation law, and she pleads not guilty to that.
Okay.
So this is like the one time they can like go farther with this.
Yeah, it's a case.
There had been many other folks who had refused to give their seats, but they had pled guilty or paid their fine or what have you. So this was like a big deal for what was about to happen. And Fred was like, I'm ready to fight this. This is what he was chomping at the bit to do. This is basically why he went to law school, was to challenge the constitutionality of segregation. And it had just already been done with regards to education, but not with transportation and public access.
Yeah. And
he went to Claudette and her family and he said, I want to pursue this to its end. Are you with me? Is this something you want to do? And Claudette immediately was like, yes. But because she was a minor, her family also had to agree.
Oh, I wonder if that was difficult to convince her family.
It was not.
Oh, okay.
They were all on board.
Okay, right on.
And that surprised him.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, we're living in like the height of the KKK. It's serious business.
That actually really surprises me too, because I would think that they would be like, we don't want any attention, we don't want any danger.
And they were on board. They were like, let's do this. So E.D. Nixon also called Rosa Parks, who was then the secretary of the Montgomery chapter of the NAACP, and she also headed up the youth group in the NAACP. He thought that Rosa would be a good person to basically act as a mentor to Claudette.
Okay.
And get her in. He was really impressed with like her fortitude, and he wanted to get her involved in the youth group in the NAACP. He didn't want her, I think part of it was he didn't want her doing these kinds of things on her own, or that he didn't want any kids to do things on their own. He wanted them to do it through their proper channels. That kind of what is the impression I was getting. So she decides to go meet Rosa. Rosa Parks helped raise money to pay for her lawyer. And Claudette actually described Rosa Parks as being kind of an aloof person, a little cold.
Really?
But that Rosa's mother was great. So Claudette's first hearing was on March 18th, 1955. She was facing 3 charges. 1, violating the segregation law. 2, disturbing the peace. And 3, the richest of all, assaulting police officer.
Oh my gosh. Okay. They're going to go there.
Yeah, they said that she had kicked and scratched them. She had long nails at the time, and she says, I think that like with all of the roughness they were, yanking her around, they probably got scratched by accident. But whatever, that doesn't matter. At the hearing, the policemen and the white passengers were telling the judge that the officers and the driver were so kind, so gentle.
Oh my God.
Almost to the point of turning the other cheek.
What the fuck?
Enraging.
It's so enraging.
And the judge declared her guilty of all charges. Which seems bad, but it's good. Because the only way you can appeal
is if you're
to a
guilty.
higher court is if you're found guilty. So Fred Gray is actually excited. Claudette, however, is fucking mortified.
She doesn't see the bigger picture probably quite yet.
And because now she's been found guilty, when she goes to school, all of these kids think that she is a bad person.
Yeah.
They would do this thing that is like so typical of what teenagers would do to each other, but still like makes my heart hurt. They would like go behind her as she's like walking down the hallway and be like, "It's my constitutional right. It's my constitutional right." Like make fun of her and mock her.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing that she had been repeating.
Yeah.
They also started calling her bus girl. She would cry a lot. I mean, this is really traumatic. Again, she lost her sister. This boy that she knew was murdered by the state. And she had this experience on the bus, thrown into jail. I mean, this is traumatic.
Yeah.
Of course she's sad. And then that would make everybody be like, oh my God, she's so emotional and she's so crazy.
Mm-hmm. And she's just trying to do this thing that she fiercely believes in to just try to stop this bullshit.
Yes.
And people are not even on her side.
And her teachers, like Miss Lawrence and Miss Nesbitt, were very supportive. So at least she had that. But it was really hard for her. She was having a really rough time. And Fred Gray is moving forward with the case. I mean, that's another source of stress, obviously. He filed an appeal to challenge that guilty verdict. When the appeal was heard, they agreed to drop the segregation, the violating the segregation law charge and the disturbing the peace charge, but kept the assault of police officers. And those charges stuck, and she was officially a criminal.
Oh my gosh.
Like, because you have to pay a lawyer to do all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And they had been doing the collections at church and stuff to help pay for her stuff. But like, this is, like, you can't just continuously pay a lawyer for the rest of your life.
No.
So basically, this is it. She's now a criminal, and her only charge is assaulting a police officer.
And that's assault is not a good one on your record.
So when her arrest originally happened, I told you that it was like put in like a leaflet and everybody knew about it and everybody's talking about it. So there were murmurs of, is it now? Should we now do the boycott? Like this Claudette situation happened. Let's do this boycott.
Yeah.
But the leaders of the movement were like, let's take a look at Claudette. Is this who we want the face of our movement to be? If we do this boycott, do we want Claudette to be the one that we're all behind?
Okay. Mm-hmm. I kind of see where this is going.
Yeah, you kind of think so, right?
Yeah.
So she's poor. Mm-hmm. She's dark-skinned. She is perceived, I mean, as a teenager, she's just being perceived poorly. Mm-hmm. Like, why is this girl thinking that she can do this thing? And the fact that she was like screaming and stuff, like they were like, no, she's a rebellious teenager. She's poor. She goes to the wrong church. She's not the one.
Okay.
So meanwhile, Claudette has no idea that these conversations have taken place. Because if she had known, she would have advocated that she really did want to be the face of this.
Yeah.
She was interested in being, like, that's the whole thing. She wanted to fight the system. But she wasn't invited to even participate in the conversation. Meanwhile, she's being ridiculed at school. She's had a lot of traumatic experiences. She's feeling more defiant than ever. Like, I think she probably felt like she was crazy. Like, looking around, like, why isn't everybody supporting this?
Yeah.
What are you doing? What are you thinking? Like, I'm fighting for our rights, for our community. She's not getting the support she wants. And one day she's waiting for her hair appointment at the beautician to go get her hair straightened, which she got done like every month or whatever. Mm-hmm. And she just thought, why the fuck am I doing that? I mean, she wouldn't say that, but I do. Like, why the fuck am I straightening my hair? I don't want straight hair. I don't want to have white hair. I want to have my hair. So she went to the kitchen sink, washed her hair, and put it in braids.
Oh, wow.
And her mom came home and was like, what in the hell?
Oh, no.
But she was like,
I'm done.
This is it. I'm done. And she went to school the next day and people freaked out.
My God. Over hair.
Yep. They made fun of her. Her classmates made fun of her. Her boyfriend dumped her.
Oh.
He like begged her to go get her hair straightened. And she was like, no, I don't want to straighten my hair. Mm-hmm. And he was like, I can't be with you.
Jeez.
So then she became even less desirable as a test case for the boycott because now she looked like something that was undesirable.
Yeah.
So spring is turning into summer. Her life is in shambles. She's so lonely. Everybody ridicules her, makes fun of her. Life is just shitty. She had gotten a few odd jobs babysitting here and there, but for the most part, she was not able to get work because as soon as somebody knew her name, they would not hire her or they'd fire her. So one day she's at a baseball game in the summertime and she meets a man. He was a light-skinned black man. She thought he was maybe about 10 years older than her. He was married, but he was separated. He said he was separated from his wife and that he had just come back from the Korean War. And he told her all kinds of Korean War stories. So she believed him. Is any of this true? No one knows. And he also was like really supportive. Like, no, you're not crazy. Yes, revolution. Yes, revolution.
Oh, so just totally.
I like your hair this way.
Yeah.
And she's 15.
So this man is 25, 28 years old, probably.
I would say he's definitely mid to late 20s at the youngest.
Okay.
And, you know, I know what it's like to be like young and just want somebody to validate you.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what he was doing. And she ended up pregnant.
Okay.
And that meant that she was even more of a
they're not
undesirable test
put
case.
her at all.
She's an unwed teen mother. Well, pregnant at this time. And is poor, is dark skinned. Like, you know, now she's got so many things against her.
Yeah.
And basically the leaders of the black community just fucking drop her.
Jeez.
They want nothing to do with her. The support is just evaporated. On December 2nd, 1955, 9 months after Claudette refused to leave her seat on the Montgomery bus, another black woman is arrested and thrown in jail. Rosa Parks had refused to give up her seat and was arrested. Now the movement had the face. Of the boycott. So leaflets were passed out telling everyone to stay home and or not ride the bus on Monday. And the leaflet mentioned Claudette, called her Claudette Colbert, who's the actress I mentioned at the very beginning.
Yeah.
That she's named after.
Yeah.
That's the name that got put in the leaflet, not her real name. So that's cool. This is what she said about this leaflet. Well, actually, not about the leaflet. So she had read the leaflet and it had just said a black woman. The news, though, had said it was Rosa Parks. When I heard on the news that it was Rosa Parks, I had several feelings. I was glad an adult had finally stood up to the system, but I felt left out. I was thinking, hey, I did that months ago, and everybody dropped me. They all turned their backs on me, especially after I got pregnant. It really, really hurt. One thing was for sure. No matter how I felt or what I thought, I wasn't going to get my chance. Claudette thought she might be able to make it to Christmas break at school without anyone noticing that she was pregnant because it was really important that they didn't. Because at Booker T. Washington High School, if a girl was pregnant, they got kicked out of school.
Yep, absolutely.
But she started showing in the fall pretty early and she was kicked out of school. So now she also
can't go to school.
Is a high school dropout.
Yeah.
So she left Montgomery and went to Birmingham to stay with her biological mother. And it gave her a chance to clear her head. The plan was that she would give birth there and finish high school there. But after 2 weeks, she was like, I can't be here. Her mom her bio mom had like no structure. And that's kind of the problem.
Yeah.
But it was great for her for a moment because she had this like break of like no expectations, no nothing. But she just really missed her dad, the guy who had raised her. That was like the thing that she was like, I just didn't want to be away from him. He was so supportive. So she went back to Montgomery. So in the leaflet that had been passed out when Rosa Parks had been arrested, they were like, no one get on the bus on Monday. Everybody boycott it. So this is like the actual boycott.
So question. So this with Rosa Parks, was that staged then? Or did she actually in that moment think, I've got to do this? Or did they set it up of this is the person that we want, and so go and do it?
There's lots of debate about that. Rosa Parks and her estate insist to this day and make corrections to people who say that it was planned. But it seems quite planned from an outsider's perspective. She was the secretary of the NAACP. And the way that she got portrayed, which is the image that we all know of this like docile, mild, sweet old lady who just wanted to rest her feet.
Yeah.
That is not who Rosa Parks was at all. She had been an active activist and feminist for years prior to this happening. She was a seamstress, which was one of the reasons why she was an ideal person, because that was a respectable job. So she was middle class, she was light skinned, her hair looked the right way, and that was a literal thing that was said. She had the right hair. And so she was the right person. But if anybody had actually like dug into her actual like philosophy and the things she wrote about and talked about, she was pretty radical. I mean, she was basically a communist. And so, but people like were able to just sort of sugarcoat who she was.
Yeah. This is blowing my mind.
and that's a disservice to Rosa Parks as well.
Exactly.
To deny the agency that she had. In fact, when Rosa Parks wrote her own biography, she spoke at length about how sexist and patriarchal being in the civil rights movement was.
Oh, I totally believe that. Because
the people who got the most recognition and continue to get the most recognition were Black men, even though the groundwork, the things that were on the ground happening were often done by Black women.
And organized. And the work.
And Rosa Parks gets to be basically the only one. The only figurehead that was a woman that is a figurehead of the civil rights movement. And even still, she doesn't get to have the power of the power that like somebody like Dr. King or even Reverend Abernathy or any of them, she gets to be like this like sweet old lady that we all feel sorry for.
Yikes. It's just, I do believe it. I'm not shocked, but it is such a reality of it's even happening nowadays of in factions of where, you're trying to get justice and you're trying to get peace. People are still human and they do fucked up shit like this.
Yes. So I don't want to make it appear as though it's a Claudette versus Rosa Parks situation. No. That's not a good thing to do. But I do think that it is important to note that no one in this situation was innocent of robbing Claudette of her rightful figurehead.
I mean, it's the truth. It doesn't take away from the progress that was made, but it's okay to know the reality of it.
Yes.
And what maybe not to do next time.
Yeah, it's important to know that there was a significant injustice done in the name of justice.
Crazy.
So the bus boycott is a huge success. So they have the buses have been practically empty because 70% of the ridership was Black and they all stopped going.
Yikes.
And here's a part of the boycott situation that I didn't know about. First of all, this wasn't the first big major boycott of the buses. That first one was in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And they had been successful in desegregating their public transportation.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah, so history fact. Put that on your list. So the Montgomery boycott, actually, the leaders of the Black community used the model of the Baton Rouge boycott and how successful it was to theirs. Again, fun fact.
Yeah.
So they created an organization called the Montgomery Improvement Association, MIA. Which is great, right? Because they're missing in action on the bus.
Yes.
Yes. So MIA, obviously, people still needed to be able to provide for their families. So they needed to be able to go to work. And most people who rode the bus were traveling to the homes of white people.
Oh.
Which were not in the areas that Black people lived.
Oh,
so
absolutely
they needed
not.
to travel, right? That's why the bus system worked. Well, then they needed to come up with an alternative system so that people could still get to those jobs, so they could still keep those jobs. So the MIA created an alternative transportation system. They raised money through the churches and in community, community drives, and the churches bought station wagons, And some folks also donated their personal vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
And then people volunteered to be drivers. And they would drive people all over the city. There would be planned routes. You'd sign up. You'd go on this car. They would come get you. There would be more in the evening than there were in the daytime. The rides were free because that was important.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they paid for the ride, that would have violated city law because they would be running like an underground taxi operation.
Yeah.
So the rides were free. Everything that had, like all of the costs associated with doing this was covered by donations. That's how they could get away with it. And this is fucking brilliant. Like, I had no idea that existed. I just thought everybody walked every day.
That's what I knew, was that there was a lot of walking.
And there were a lot of people who walked because a lot of the people who walked were doing so as like a visible sign of their protest. So there were definitely people who did that. In fact, there was this a story I read about this really old lady who was walking to her job, and one of the drivers pulled over and was like, hey, hey, get in. Well, I'll take you. And she was like, no. I'm walking these miles because I should never have had to, I should have never have had to move from my seat. And I'm going to do whatever it is I can to make sure that this never happens again. Wow. So people did it as like personal.
Yeah.
And this one guy walked, I think he said something like 320 miles over the course of the summer.
Yikes. Oh, yeah. And it was summertime.
Mm-hmm. There were also weekly mass meetings that were discussing the boycott. And Dr. King was basically the leader of these like meetings and stuff. He had been asked. Remember way back when I said that they had that group of black leaders who met with the police, and he had been asked to join that group? That was specific. Like, they asked him to join. He previously had not lived in Montgomery. I think he lived in Birmingham. So he was not a Montgomery person at the time, but he became a very big part of this Montgomery movement.
Okay.
So Dr. King spoke at every one of these big, huge mass meetings, and Claudette went to a lot of them, more than one a month, like 2 a month, that she would go, and she was like very moved by him, as most people were. She said that he was saying all the things she'd always wanted to say to white people. The bus boycott was costing the bus lines more than $3,000 a day in losses.
Ooh, doggy.
Lucas, this is in 1955. Tell us what that would cost today.
$3,000 in 1955 is the equivalent of $29,451.30 in today's dollars.
But it also meant that everybody who's involved in this is a target. Dr. King was at one point arrested for speeding. He was going like 30 and a 25. And his house was bombed. Edie Nixon found dynamite on his front lawn. Joanne Robinson, her front window was shattered. And her car was covered in acid.
Jeez.
Both of those were done by policemen.
Oh my gosh.
Of course. And Claudette's former lawyer, Fred Gray, could see the boycott was working. But to him, it was like, okay, but we'll just, if this works, it's going to be like Baton Rouge, where, yeah, we desegregate the buses, but that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't actually say anything in the law about like, this is not okay. He still wants to challenge the constitutionality of the segregation. So he knows that if they challenge the law and not a specific case, like in Claudette's case, that was a specific case. And so then it would follow the chains of state court.
Oh, okay.
But if you challenge a state law, it's going to go to federal court. And he knew that at the federal level, they had a better chance of overturning the law. So he is like, we need to have a case. And he wants to build this case. And he's looking for the right people. And he's like selecting people. And the first person on his list is Claudette. He's like, I want you to be a part of this. And he absolutely ruled Rosa Parks out immediately.
Oh.
Partly because hers was still in the system.
Okay.
So once again, Claudette and her family are asked to do this big sacrifice. And they say yes again, that they're all on board. Fred Gray reminded them that this would make their life potentially very dangerous because at this point, Like, Dr. King's house has been bombed. This white pastor who was the pastor of a black church, his house was bombed. Like, it was like they didn't give a fuck who you were or what you look like. They were going to fucking bomb your shit. So they still say yes. He reminded them that this is dangerous, and they're like, that's okay. We want to do this. And it was going to take a little time to build this case. And Fred knew he needed more than just Claudette, but he wanted Claudette to sort of be the fucking center, the nucleus of this. Claudette gave birth at this time on March 29th, 1956, to a boy named Raymond. It was only 6 weeks before that first hearing for this federal lawsuit that she's a part of. He was born very light-skinned, reportedly with blonde hair and blue eyes.
Oh.
And Claudette had refused the entire time she was pregnant to tell anybody who the father was. So as soon as this baby is born, immediately everybody thinks that the father must be a white guy. Okay. And that is yet another mark against her instead of him. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, I can't believe you would do this with a white man.
Oh, jeez.
And even more people sort of abandon her.
Yeah.
On May 11th, 1956, Claudette joined her lawyer, Fred Gray, and her fellow complainants. So I said that he wanted to find more than one.
Yeah.
He only asked black women. So there were originally 5 of them, but when the court case actually made its way to court for the first hearing, there were only 4.
Okay.
So there's Claudette. Then there's Aurelia Browder, a 37-year-old seamstress and a single mother. She was a widow. Susie McDonald, who was 77, and Mary Louise Smith, who was 19. She also was just a teenager, and her case was very similar to Claudette's. Each one of them was required to testify, and each one of them was then questioned by the city attorney, who was a real jackass named Walter Nabe. And he had a strategy. The first strategy was to say that the black community didn't have a problem with the segregated bus seating before the boycott, and that twofold. Number 2, that Dr. King was an outsider troublemaker who was just sort of riling them up.
Okay.
When it came, so each of the other women came before her to testify. So she was the very last one, and Fred Gray did this on purpose.
Okay.
He wanted Claudette to be the linchpin. And he knew she would be, and I found that to be just a real testament to her character. When it came time for her to testify, she was obviously terrified, but she was really ready. She was like, I'm going to do this. And she told the story of her arrest. The actual part where she was talking about being kicked and dragged and put in the cell, she's emotional. Mm-hmm. Lots of people in the courtroom start to cry at the telling of what happened to her. Then it's Walter Nabe's turn to question her.
Oh, no. And
he just sort of really badgers her and is like trying to get her to say that she never cared about segregated seating before. And she was, and it's just that's very funny, right? Because like we know her story. And it's like, no, she gave a shit.
No, she was obviously very upset.
She was very upset, like from the jump. So finally he asks, why did you stop riding the buses on December 5th? And she said, because we were treated wrong, dirty, and nasty. Claudette had performed beautifully under pressure. One of the lawyers called her their star witness. The court date was the first time that Claudette had a chance to meet Mary Louise Smith, the other teenager who was in the lawsuit. And after testifying, the two of them went out to lunch together and like traded stories about their arrests and what happened. And Mary Louise Smith was also passed over as being the figurehead.
Oh.
She also happened before Rosa Parks.
Huh.
Because they said her dad was a drunkard.
Man, they really wanted somebody that just checked all the boxes, huh?
That's right. Couldn't be a teenager. You couldn't be dark skinned. You couldn't be poor. You couldn't have a family with some history. Nothing. On June 19th, 1956, Judge Johnson declared the segregation law unconstitutional.
Sweet.
So there were 3. It was a 3-judge panel. 2 of them said it was unconstitutional, and the other one was like, no, I think it's fine. But he was outnumbered.
Yeah.
This Judge Johnson guy, side note, real good guy. Real good guy. Only white guy. I'm like, real good guy. He was like across the board, like, none of this is constitutional. Like,
Yeah.
all these cases kept coming before him, and he was like reliably
Someone who actually respects the
struck down segregation every time.
Constitution.
He was the one who said there is no such thing as separate but equal. Which was, prior to this, the reason why segregation was legal was because of Plessy versus Ferguson, which said that segregation was legal as long as it was separate but equal, which was never true. It was never going to be true. The Black community was elated, but it wasn't over yet. The mayor of Montgomery, his name is Mayor Gale, he vowed to appeal it to the Supreme Court. And then that happened. And so we're like still in court. Everything's still going.
It's a very long process.
It is. But when it made its way to the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court agreed with the lower court, and the segregation law in Montgomery and all of Alabama was labeled unconstitutional. But the mayor was still not going to do anything.
He's not going to listen to the Supreme Court.
He said that he wasn't going to do anything until they made him.
Okay.
So they were still fucking walking and doing these like group rides. And then he took the MIA to court to say that their little like rideshare program was illegal.
How?
He had anyway, because they were doing it at the city level, they had sympathetic judges. And so on the day that the court hearing to decide whether or not MIA was violating city law was being decided, all of a sudden the mayor and a whole bunch of other people leave the courtroom, and there's all this whispering and whatever. And then they find out that, in fact, the Supreme Court had ruled it unconstitutional and the federal marshals were on their way.
Oh, shit.
So on December 20th, 2 federal marshals showed up and served notices to the mayor that they had to follow the law. So after 381 days...
It's a long-ass time.
The boycott finally ended, and they were victorious. The next morning, Dr. King and 4 other people paid their fare and got on the bus. A photo of this moment was taken. It was historic. It was splashed across newspapers. It was put in history textbooks. You've seen it, I'm sure of it. None of the 4 women whose court case allowed for this moment to take place were in the photo or mentioned.
Wow. That is so heartbreaking. All right.
Of course, the violence that followed this was horrific.
Yeah.
Bombs went off at churches. Houses of Black leaders and white allies were attacked. A 15-year-old Black girl was beaten at a bus stop. Another Black woman was shot in both legs by a sniper while riding the bus.
Jeez.
There were threats to blow up houses of the women who were in the case. Black churches bombed across the city. Every night, Claudette's father stayed up all night long, his chair facing the window and the door with a shotgun in his arm.
Jeez.
And after this happened, all of this stuff, Claudette became obviously well known. She couldn't keep a job. She couldn't go to school. She got her GED in 1957, a year after the case was won. She enrolled at Alabama State College, but they saw her as a troublemaker. Mm-hmm. She didn't last long there. She dropped out after a year, and she just couldn't find any way to make a life in the South. So she did what her classmates had told her to do all along, and she moved to New York City.
Okay.
Claudette originally started traveling back and forth from New York City to Montgomery with Raymond to see her parents. And, it's hard to raise a baby and try to go to work and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And so she was trying to find work close to where her family lived, but she could never find any. And a year later, she gave birth again to another son named Randy. Eventually, she left both of her sons in the care of her mother and returned to New York alone. Her life in New York was really, really tough. At one point, she was so desperate that she considered doing sex work to try to pay her bills. But she was turned off by how involved in drugs and stuff it was. Eventually, she ended up getting a nursing certificate, and she worked as a nurse's aide in a nursing home, basically the rest of her life. Her son, Raymond, joined the Army when he became a young adult, but he later became addicted to drugs and died of an overdose in Claudette's apartment.
Oh, no.
Randy took the opposite path. He went to college, he got married, and he lives right now with his family in Atlanta. So she has, I think, 4 grandchildren.
Okay.
In the year 2000, sorry, Troy State University, which is in Montgomery, opened a Rosa Parks Museum to honor the bus boycott and its place in the history of civil rights. Roy White, who was like the main organizer of this museum, called Claudette and asked her to appear in a video to tell her story. But she refused, saying, they've already called it the Rosa Parks Museum, so they've already made up their minds what the story is.
Oh, snap.
He told her, like, this might give you some closure, and she responded, personally, there can be no closure. They took away my life. If they want closure, they should give it to my grandchildren.
Oh.
Claudette, one positive note, Claudette did continue her friendship with fellow plaintiff Mary Louise Smith.
Seemed like it. I thought that was going that way.
They would talk on the phone and things like that. The 2 women and their families began to fight for their recognition in the Montgomery bus boycott in the early aughts. I think there was like a grandchild or something who was like, wait, what? Why is Rosa Parks getting all this glory? Like, it was my grandma. So in 2005, a writer for the Montgomery Advertiser tracked Claudette down and told her story basically for the first time. And this suddenly reignited some interest in Claudette. And that's how writer Philip Hoos had heard about her.
Okay.
And he tried for years to get her to tell her full story to him. But she was like, maybe when I retire. And finally in 2007, she said, I'll do this. Over the course of a year, he interviewed her and many others and wrote a biography of her called Claudette Colvin, Twice Toward Justice, which was published in 2009 and won the National Book Award.
Wow.
And it finally really kind of gave a lot of attention to her story. But once again, Claudette was looked over when the Smithsonian's the huge National Museum of African American History opened up in 2016. Mm-hmm. There's a section dedicated to Rosa Parks, but Claudette Colvin was not included, and she and her family were not invited to the dedication of the museum.
Oh my gosh.
In 2019, a statue of Rosa Parks was unveiled in the city of Montgomery, and 4 granite markers were placed near the statue to honor the 4 plaintiffs in the case. So that's the extent of her recognition. But that same year in 2019, however, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez recognized Claudette on the floor of the House of Representatives for her, quote, courage to stand in the face of injustice and demand her recognition of inalienable rights. In March 2020,
hey,
the Equal Justice Initiative opened the Legacy Pavilion in Montgomery, which features figures of the civil rights movement and includes a photo of Claudette Colvin next to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., giving her equal billing in their pavilion. Claudette actually moved back to Alabama sometime in the last couple of years, I think 2019, where she still lives today. She is 81 years old.
Ooh.
Claudette Colvin's story is an example of the kind of erasure that happens to women in history, especially Black women, whose status in the world allows them to be looked over. She was a dark-skinned, poor, pregnant, and unwed teen girl, and therefore her incredibly important contributions and her unwavering bravery have been overlooked in favor of someone, quote-unquote, more respectable. An older, soft-spoken, light-skinned, middle-class married woman. This does both of these women a grave injustice and a disservice to the telling of our shared history. It should not have been a question of either or, but an embrace of both women.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
Remember Claudette Colvin's name and tell her story to your friends and your children. Let them know that anyone can be a hero, no matter their age, complexion, or economic status.
That was great. I had no idea at all.
I had heard about Claudette Colvin and that she had been discarded because she was a pregnant teenager. But that's actually the wrong story too, because she was not pregnant when she refused to get up from her seat on the bus. Mm-hmm. She was not pregnant when she was arrested. All of that stuff happened after she had been abandoned. And so that even is a disrespect to her story. To not have the
it's just
facts
an
straight.
easy excuse to pull out of the bag.
Yeah, because it does give a lot of, I think, especially white liberals, the like, oh, well, I mean, a pregnant unwed teen mom. Like, we don't want that. And it's like, that doesn't...
That wasn't the reason.
And first off, that's not the truth. She wasn't pregnant and unwed when she was arrested. But even if she had been, that should not have discounted what she had done.
Yeah.
And why she was fighting.
And the fact that all 4 of these women didn't even get any recognition for this serious case that helped, like, nailed the movement down.
The case is actually called Browder versus Gale. Gale being the mayor, Browder being the defendant alphabetically who came first, which was Aurelia, and she was, I think she was the 37-year-old seamstress. So, like, have you heard of Aurelia Browder?
No.
Mary Louise Smith? Like, these women were just completely erased. Even now, if you read, like, a modern textbook about the civil rights movement, 1, they're not mentioned in the Montgomery bus boycott. Or if they are, then B, they're a footnote. They're a little box on the side.
Yeah.
But it was their case that actually made the law unconstitutional.
And their experience and their willingness to be able to stand with the case. I mean, they had to be asked, do you want to participate in this?
Do you want to put you and your entire family at risk of being killed by the KKK? And they said, yes, I will do this for the better good. And then still got erased. That's infuriating to me.
It is.
In any case, that's why I wanted to do Claudette Colvin. Because I think it's important that we know her name and that we say it often and that we repeat it to others.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
So I'm going to repeat it again because it's so important. But if you want to read her biography, it's fan-fucking-tastic. Again, it won the National Book Award. Claudette Colvin, Twice Toward Justice by Philip Hoos. Really quick, fast read. I mean, I think I read it in maybe 4 hours and then I reread it.
Oh, wow.
I was not going to stand. Rosa Parks' predecessors recall their history-making acts of resistance by Olivia B. Waxman for Time magazine in 2020. I used Wikipedia for dates and stuff. A 2000 article called She Would Not Be Moved by Gary Young for The Guardian. And I used a clip from Claudette Colvin, the original Rosa Parks, by Great Big Story on YouTube. Incidentally, that last one, it's called the original Rosa Parks. And that just pisses me off.
Yeah.
And the first comment is like a young black woman who's like, she's not the original Rosa Parks. She's the original Claudette Colvin.
There you go.
Put some respect on her name.
Yeah. I don't like that.
I didn't like that
I don't
either.
like that at all.
I didn't even want to read the title of it, but I had to because I give them credit.
Oh, that was fantastic.
Thank you. I hope everybody else enjoyed it.
All right, definitely share that story. I can't wait to, like, go home and tell my family. Be like, hey, listen to this.
And I know it was long, but I think it was just so worth telling the right way and getting the details in there because
it's important.
Her story has been overlooked so often that it's like I didn't want to shortchange her. So thank you for sticking with us. I hope you listened to it at 1.25 speed. Thank you for listening, everybody. Remember, we have a Patreon if you want to support us. We also have a store on TeePublic. We're working on getting our own web store up. We've got our t-shirts started.
We do. We've got t-shirts en route.
But in the meantime, please consider supporting us on those 2 places. We're really working hard. We put a lot of time and effort into what we do. And we thank you for listening and sharing it with your friends and loved ones.
All right, we'd like to thank our editor as well. So thank you to Lucas.
Thank you to Jennifer Finch for our badass theme music.
All right, well, we will talk to you next week.
Yeah.
Bye.